Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to Ask the Cyber Pro, brought to you by your friends at Beryllium InfoSec Collaborative. I am Tim McNiff, and we are joined this week on Ask the Cyber Pro. Our Cyber Pro is Michelle Killian of Code42.
Hello, everyone.
We're talking about insider threats with, well, you're going to kill me if I say you're an expert on that, but I'm going to say it because you know you are the Cyber Pro and we're talking about it. So let me give you a little background on what Michelle's all about. She's the Director of Information Security at Code42, a leader in next-gen data loss protection. Code42 helps secure the ideas of more than, are you ready for this? 50,000 organizations around the world across more than 2 million endpoints and cloud collaboration platforms. No pressure. Michelle has over 15 years in the security space with a focus on governance, risk management, and compliance. So you would be best to listen to her when it comes to insider threat. Welcome to Ask the Cyber Pro.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So when our friends at Beryllium asked you, would you come on and be the Cyber Pro? Your reaction was?
Well, no, I'm excited to be here. It's good to talk about the Ask the Cyber Pro series is really fantastic. And so hopefully we can shed some light on an interesting topic.
Well, you know what? It is. And it's a conversation that we as a nation, as a community, we really need to have. And this one, as every one of these episodes has been for me, sort of a novice for all this information security has been a real education. And this one is one of those ones where it's just got a little sizzle to it. Insider threat, And as you've educated me on this topic, I mean, this is something that not only is it here, but it may be here to stay.
Yeah, I would say it's one of those things where insider threat, old school, you think about like, how do you pilfer money from the organization? And now what's money to an organization?
Like maybe embezzling.
Yeah, right. But today money, swap that out with intellectual property and that's what we're dealing with.
And now, as we have all become increasingly reliant on our phones, on our computers, on our laptops, on our tablets, and every company operates on this, it's all about intellectual property.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of set the stage. So when we talk about insider threat, what we're talking about is really any threat to an organization's security from the inside. And there's some nuance there, and we'll talk more about that. But it's a rising threat. And the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, which is kind of like the standard where security people get all their information
Industry
from.
Bible.
Yes, basically. So they track where threats to data come from. And insider threat is on the rise. I think this last year it accounts for 34% of threats to data. And largely for reasons you spoke to. So one, we've got intellectual property, right? And every company today
is commodity.
Yeah, right. Everyone has something that they need to protect. And what's interesting about that data is that it's mobile, it's very portable, because we have our coworkers, our employees are saying, I want to be able to work remote. I want to be able to work from my phone. I want to be able to do collaboration.
Can't lock it in a vault and say, okay, let's go home, everybody. We're safe for the night.
Yeah, absolutely. So that data is very portable. The second reason why insider threat is on the rise is because our employees are also portable, right? And I don't mean to say that in like a expendable, movable way, but
it's a transient business world in which we live.
Absolutely. So my mom, for example, she is retiring from a job she held most of her adult life in April.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Congrats, Mom. But that's not a world that we live in. And it's almost like a reverse reality where if you stay somewhere too long, it almost seems as if you're stale or stagnating. Yeah. So it's in our best interests as employees to move around. And so what you have then, portable data, portable employees, and all these organizations who are now basically technology organizations with something that they need to protect. And then the third reason why I think that insider threat is on the rise is because as a security industry, we're getting better at protecting our defenses, like keeping those bad actors out. So we're finding the most obvious ways they're getting in and closing those holes up. And so they're looking for other ways to get into an organization.
So they have to become more creative
Yes.
and find different ways to get in.
Absolutely.
Because they're just not going to take no for an answer.
No, right? I mean, it's not as if we just close the door and they just walk away, unfortunately.
So, well, going through this, Michelle decided we're going to break this down really into 3 types of insider threats. And we're going to go through each one of these. And there's some overlap. There's some, you gave me some examples of each one. You could kind of say, well, couldn't number 1 be number 3? So, but we're going to break this down. And then at the end of this, what we want to do is Michelle is going to give you basically an insider threat program. And she's going to give you 4 key steps to developing your own insider step program, but you got to hang around because that's waiting for the end. So let's start with the 3 types of insider threats. And your first one you said was intentional or malicious.
Yes.
Somebody knows what they're doing.
Yeah, and so this is the one that plays out in the headlines a lot. It makes for a good movie. But so this is someone who is often leaving an organization or getting ready to leave an organization. Maybe they've gotten recruited by a competitor, and what they're doing when they're leaving is grabbing information, whether it's source code or customer lists or some sort of financial documentation, things that are important to the organization, but also be really useful to a competitor. They're grabbing that information before they leave and taking it with them to the new organization. So that's with intent, definitely causing harm to an organization. A good example here is Tesla. So that was playing a lot out in the market space a lot. So there was an engineer at Tesla working on the autopilot project, and he got recruited by a competitor in China.
We're looking at you, China.
And as part of that process of leaving, he uploaded, I believe it was something like 120,000 files to his personal iCloud drive and deleted them off his own personal drive and then took those to the competitor with him. So this is in litigation right now, but that's a real clear example of malicious intent, an insider doing harm.
And this one too is in that particular case, the company is a Chinese company, it's a direct competitor. And so we've seen this. This is sort of the textbook for a lot of countries, state sponsored. So that you could look at that as a business versus business. It may be bigger than that. You never know when you're going to find yourself in that either. You also had another example, and you told me, Goodwill, a former employee accused of stealing over $93,000 from the company. They faked the payroll records.
Yeah.
Putting relatives' name, deposit the money directly into their own bank account. Sometimes you may think that, hey, we've had Barry or Marge in accounting for 20 plus years. Isn't that great? Only to find out that Barry or Marge has been, doing the inside job for many years. Yeah,
that's a super good point. And that example is a good one to highlight. I mean, Goodwill, who would do something wrong?
To a charitable organization.
Exactly. And there's a nuance to insider threat, which I think, so we're not spending enough time on it because it's been an emerging threat, one, but then also there's kind of a yuckiness to it, right? This isn't anybody in security who's managing an insider threat program. They won't say, I love this part of the job. But the reality is, people do take information. It may not be intentional, but information is leaving. You have to be protecting it. And regardless of your culture, you may have the best space that you're working at. You still are potentially a victim. And so you have to be taking precautions.
You need to have a plan. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. The second type was unintentional or non-malicious. This, as you put to me, could be an employee who accidentally causes harm, publicly sharing a sensitive file, accidentally syncing a folder for their computer to a cloud drive. Example, we were discussing this, and I said to you, could be in the sense that maybe you are taking home work to do, and you have your laptop in your car, and you stop off to buy groceries, and you walk out, and your car window is smashed, and your laptop is gone.
Yeah, yep, that is a form of insider threat. This one's tricky, and this is, again, there's a lot of nuance to this. You could be sharing information and causing harm to an organization without intent, without even realizing it. There was a great example where a security researcher had uncovered like 90 different organizations who were using Box for enterprise. So corporate sanctioned at cloud computing sharing application. And what employees were doing was they were changing the settings of the files to public. So they were now publicly available on the web. And in some cases, some of the folders were being indexed in search engines. If you did a Google search, you could find some of these documents that were supposed to be private. So again, non-malicious, because I can't imagine in most of these cases that an employee was saying, hey, I'm going to change this setting and see if I can cause something horrible to happen. Most often, they did not even realize the consequences of changing that setting. And again, where so much of security goes back to awareness and education and understanding what your role is in protecting data. But so that's a great example of non-malicious, but that information that was found was social security numbers, it was IT network diagrams, it was financial plans and strategies, very sensitive information that could be used for harm.
And we really all have to, as a community, sort of grow up and understand that the whole playing field has changed. Mm-hmm. And instead of going, I hate to change my password. I hate when they tell me do this. Get over it. It just has to be done because this is the world in which we live.
Absolutely. It's the world in which we live in. There is a balance, but usually when your security teams are saying, hey, we really need you to do this or pay attention to this, it's for a good reason.
Okay, now we're going to get a little gritty here. This is the number 3 is the malicious outsider as insider.
Yeah, and so some would call this inside threat versus insider threat. Security people have really, we have this problem with like wanting to label everything, and everyone else is like, just tell me what I need to know.
Yeah, you're going inside baseball.
Right. But so what this is really, again, these bad actors on the outside trying to find other ways to get inside. A really good example of this is just playing out at AT&T. So bad actors wanted to unlock cell phones because unlock cell phones, carriers lock cell phones and then they make you pay for them over the life of a contract. That's how they make their money. But these phones are very valuable. So if I can unlock a cell phone, do whatever I want with it, that frees it up. I can resell it. There's this whole market around that. So what these bad guys did at AT&T at a call center was they bribed people on the inside to do a few things. 1, to install malware, which allowed for the unlocking of the phones. 2, they bribed them to patch the malware, which blows my mind because patching is a problem with security generally. And I was like, whoa, the bad guys got the insiders to patch the malware. And then they had them install some access points, and they even got a few of them to give them some credentials. So outsider working with an insider to do harm. And I believe they paid about $1 million in bribes to these people. So you can see where
it's lucrative. There's money to play with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, we don't know. It's hard to put a value on this. I mean, because you look at, you can say, well, they paid $1 million, but what was their potential? Yeah. And as we talked about earlier, with the transitive nature of employment, whether it being employers don't want to keep people or they don't maybe try to retain them the way they used to, or people just don't have that loyalty. Now you've got this thing where people just don't have that affinity or that loyalty to whoever they are. So if more money comes along and suddenly they're thinking, well, if I do this, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, right, absolutely. I don't have this where that was from, but I remember recently reading maybe a year ago where they were like, a large percentage of your employee base would be willing to sell their password to somebody for like less than $1,000. Like, that's keys to the kingdom, and we're so flippant with it.
Yeah, it doesn't take a lot. All right, so what is the message here to the end user?
Oh, that's great. So end users. So what's important for everyone to know, I would say there's kind of 3 key points here. First, understand what acceptable use is at your organization. Usually you sign off on some sort of like security policy or acceptable use policy. Know what that means. Like if it's saying don't go digging around in these spaces, maybe don't go digging around in those spaces. Or if you find data that you shouldn't have access to, let somebody know. And probably most importantly, realize that you are being monitored, right? As part of acceptable use, using network resources, someone is paying attention, and that's for the benefit of the organization. Second, I would say if you're going to leave an organization and you want to take something, ask. I mean, that sounds basic. And this is tricky. Like, again, the grayness of all of insider threat. As part of your job, you're creating a lot of stuff. Some of it's really useful to you and not necessarily useful to the organization. Some of it's very useful to the organization and would be damaging if it was transferred somewhere else. So, a good example, we've got a project management team, and we've got a project manager who's created this really great template, which helps them manage projects. And it's super useful, helps him be very highly functioning. If he were to leave the organization and want to take that template with him, there's nothing sensitive in there. I mean, sure, it might benefit him at his next job, but no harm, no foul there, right? But if he had the project plan for the year-long project or for a new product that we're launching, that, on the other hand, is something that we need to guard more closely. So if you do feel like you have ownership and stake in something and want to take it with, I would ask, right?
Yeah, perhaps that can be negotiated.
Mm-hmm.
And your third point is understand that you're a target.
Yes, absolutely. So, right, going back to like you may be best intended and you may be taking care of yourself, but there could be someone on the outside that's trying to get in and using you as that target. And so this goes back to like when we talk about don't click on links. So if I'm a bad guy trying to get in, I get you to click on a link. you're downloading software and now I have a backdoor into your system, or I have grabbed your credentials. And so now I can pretend to be you doing all the bad stuff inside. We just did a recent tabletop exercise at our organization where we walked through a scenario, an insider threat scenario, where we said, okay, I'm a bad guy. I'm going to target this team on LinkedIn, and I'm going to get all the names of everyone who works in this department, and I'm going to send very targeted messages. I'm going to get somebody to download something, and I'm going to have my in, right? That was useful for a lot of reasons. One, it was playing out a scenario that could happen, but two, it gave a little bit of context as to why. And one of the things that we could get better at in security is explain the why. We say, don't click on links, right? Well, but some links you want to click on and some you don't. There is legitimate reasons. So why are you telling me that? What's the potential downfall? So, well, if you click on that link from that email that you weren't expecting, you could download software, which could give somebody a backdoor, which could give them access into your systems, right? So that's kind of the information. You need to have awareness.
Awareness, to be aware. All right, we promised you off the top that at the end of this, we were going to give you a little trick, a bonus, which is how to develop an insider threat program. And this is something that you've developed, and you have 4 key steps to doing this. And the first one is build a team.
Yes. Yeah. This is first and foremost. It's important that you get a team together to operate off of. And this shouldn't just be exclusively run by security. You want to have legal, if you have some sort of insider legal department, and your people team, and then other people as you really define what the program is. But so legal is important, especially when you're having conversations about malicious intent or not, and then damage. And then your people team or your HR team is really valuable for 2 different reasons. One, because they're going to be having a lot of the conversations if there is some sort of inside activity happening. But 2, situational awareness, right? Your people team has understanding of who's on a PIP or who might be looking for a job, or if there's changes happen within the organization that may change your threat landscape. So that's an important triangle to start with and then build with as you have need. And then step 2, and this is probably the hardest step, is to determine what you care about.
Define your assets.
Define your assets, right? Basic Security 101. So think about what information do you have in your organization that if it got in the wrong hands could be detrimental to you. It could be source code. It could be sales lists. It could be a potential partnership on a marketing program, right? That's going to vary completely depending on what your organization is. And then once you have that, step 3 is then deciding who do you need to be monitoring, right? So if it's source code, I probably want to keep an eye on my engineers. If it's privileged access to network systems, it's probably my sysadmins. If it's marketing programs and new features that we're announcing, well, it's probably my marketing team. So again, who that is varies.
It could also be your partners, your contracted partners, third parties.
Yes.
I mean, we've seen that before. That's an access point.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great access point, and especially when we think about the fluidity of people. We have so many contractors and third parties who are helping us. They're often someone that you want to keep an eye on as well.
And the last one is finalize process and technology needs.
Yep. So the last step. So you have your framework, you have your team. Then you think about, based off the problem you're trying to solve, what tools do you want to put in place? And then maybe more importantly, what processes. And a good first process that I would recommend everyone start with is departing employee, because we all have people who are leaving, and this is a potential gateway for data to go. And so this could be as basic as here's a checklist of all the things that I want to do before somebody leaves. And it includes let's look at your computer, or if you've got tools that can give you visibility into what data has moved before they left. That's even better insight. And then also that's a great reminder to have if you haven't signed off on an agreement on not sharing information, here's a good time to do it. Or it's a good reminder to go back and say, hey, remember you did that at one point in time. So you've got covering yourself there.
Well, I love the fact that you brought this issue, to our attention and the examples that you shared, but there's great value in giving anybody, even a homeowner, somebody out there just doesn't have their own business, but this is all things that you can take home with you. You know who your team is, what it is you need to protect, you define those critical roles, who's going to do what, and then have a process. And I would just add to that, my only thing coming back where I come from is communicate all that.
Yes.
Be clear about that up front. You know, what are if you're coming in to work for my company, you need to say up front to you, okay, these are the expectations and this is what it is. Because anecdotally, people will be researching the company and they'll say, hey, do you know anybody who worked there? And they'll tell on the way out, look, this is what you can and can't do on the way out. Define those expectations, because if somebody starts acting outside it, you'll know it right away, and so will they.
Yeah. And and it's a good point. There really are still two schools of thought around this. One, because there's the ickiness of watching an employee, and what's important, the message we try and drive home is it's not about necessarily watching a person, it's about watching the data, because at the end of the day, it's the data we're concerned about. So at Code, we have a very open process where we communicate what we're what we're monitoring, what we're doing, what our program looks like. We try to be very open and upfront about it. But there still is a very large contingent of security who thinks, now this is something that needs to be under the belt and you don't get to know about it.
Okay.
Yep. But and both, there's not one that's better than the other.
Right.
And it is pretty culturally driven, but you definitely want to have a stance on that. I think the open approach is good because people on some level do know. And so you might as well have them in on the process.
It always eliminates the, I didn't know.
Yeah.
That's just gone, not an option. All right. You also listed there's great resources. You mentioned the National Insider Threat Task Force, CERT, Center for Emergency Response, and the open source insider threat community. That's a Code42. You actually participate in that group.
Yeah, and the first two, the National Insider Threat Task Force, they have some really great documentation on different maturity levels of an insider threat program. So if you're just getting started, there's great baseline stuff, which includes the steps that I talked about. But if you have a process in place today and are looking to mature it, it's also a fantastic resource. And then CERT they were really a leader in insider threat development. And if you think about government, insider threat has long been a concern for government. And so they have a lot of resources, government resources, that businesses can and should be using as well.
All wonderful information. Michelle Killian is the Director of Information Security at Code42. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was wonderful. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And it went faster than you thought it was going to, didn't it? We told you. All right. For more information on Code42, we're going to have a link to their website. You can find that in the description box below. Best way to reach Michelle is through your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. If you have questions or want to talk more, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Okay. To see past episodes of Ask the Cyber Pro, check out the link in the description below. You're also going to be able to see an icon where you can subscribe to the Beryllium channel for YouTube as well. And we want to thank you for your time. Hope you got something out of this. It's a great opportunity for me to be a part of Ask the Cyber Pro. And one more time, getting great information from Michelle Killian at Code42. Thank you for your time. Be well, and we'll see you next month on Ask the Cyber Pro.